As homelessness continues to rise in the United States, how can we better love our sisters and brothers who have hit rock bottom and are living on the streets? Welcome to the Beyond the Lines podcast. In a world where there are a few loud voices spreading division, we want you to know that there are more of us who want unity and love. We love beyond the lines of differences so that our lives can be full of diversity. Come listen with us and join a movement of people who are willing to love all people at all times. Today on the podcast, we have a special guest named Justin Harvey. Justin went from having wealth and comfort to losing it all and finding himself on the streets. But that's not the end of his story. One day he found hope and he was able to get back on his feet. 4 years ago, you could have found Justin drunk and on the streets of Phoenix. But today he is the founder of several businesses, including a nonprofit. He has created an organization that is designed to help others like him find hope in the midst of their darkness on the streets. Join us today as we hear his powerful story and learn a little of what we can do to help our neighbors who have nowhere to call home.
Well, welcome everybody to the Beyond the Lines podcast. My name is Jonathan Miller, and I'm your designated listener today on the podcast. And today I have DJ Hayward joining me as a listener.
Folks.
Hey, how's it going, DJ? How's your life?
I'm doing well. Yeah, everything's great.
Yeah, Easter's over.
Yeah, Easter's over. I mean, this weekend's busy too, but it's going to be great.
Yeah, really excited about that. So today on the podcast, we have a very special guest to listen to in Justin Harvey. Justin has spent time without a home in the Phoenix area, and he knows what it's like to live on the streets. But today, we're going to hear about his story of coming from that place to starting a nonprofit and being back on his feet. And he's built this nonprofit to help those without homes. And man, I'm just so excited to hear all about that and hear more about your story. Welcome, Justin. I'm glad you're here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. First, I like to just dive into these things, so I hope it's not too abrupt for you. But first, I would just love to start where you came from. Like, how did you become homeless, and what were the circumstances that kind of brought you there?
Well, I guess I'll start from 2015. So in 2015, I was a successful businessman. I was fairly well off. I had a beautiful fiance, a new son who was about 2. Lived on a lake. Life was good for me, but I was also an alcoholic. I had started drinking pretty early. Well, not that early, probably later than some, early 20s. And by 30, I was a functional alcoholic. I was in business, running around in corporate circles, and, everybody drank, traveling and hotels and events and conferences. Everybody was drinking all the time. And so it was just pretty normal. There's a lot of other, bad behaviors that sort of came with being a, powerful, wealthy guy, was very arrogant and prideful. I thought I was living my best life and everything was going good. And then one day some guys broke into my office, some guys who worked for me, and stole a bunch of stuff. I was a juvenile delinquent, but hadn't had any, criminal issues for a long time, by the time I was 30. But this brought up some feelings for me. And, but I called the cops. I'm a businessman. They stole from me. I've got cameras, called the cops. Cops came by. And, I was already drunk. It was like 8:30, 9 in the morning. And I was, basically ordering the cops to go over and get my stuff and telling them what to do. And they pretty much just they were kind enough to humor me a little bit, but not much. They're, pretty much just like, you're a drunk, crazy man. They said, we can't help you. You need to take him to court. I was furious. I couldn't handle that solution and kept drinking. And I ended up making a horrible decision and tried to fix it myself. I didn't hurt the guy, but I made a bad choice, damaged some stuff and just raging drunk, and I caught a new charge. Everything just collapsed. All my clients, my other employees, my partners, even my fiance all lost trust in me. Money stopped coming in shortly after my wife left with my son out of town. Drowned my sorrows in the bottle. Everything just crumbled. I lost everything. I lost my business. I lost my vehicles. I lost all my money. And I was in court. I got put on probation. I did a little jail time. Couldn't handle probation. Still drinking all day. Ended up violating probation, leaving the country. And about a year later, ended up sick and dying in Mexico from alcohol poisoning, just body failing. And I mean, that was it. I went from having everything to being sick and dying with no one, and everyone hated me. I couldn't take care of anything. It was the worst. And so I was homeless and on the run. That was 4 years ago.
Wow.
Maybe a little more.
That is so crazy how fast everything happened for you. Like that from going from being wealthy and in a good place in life to being all the way like on the wrong side of the law and running and without a home and without any support whatsoever. It's so crazy how fast that can happen.
Yeah.
So how long was that time period in your life from being on the run to
There was about a year of tromping around in the mud, just drunk most all day, begging for money. I mean, cashing in coins for shooters. I mean, the worst of the worst, waiting for liquor stores to open in the morning, getting sick if I don't drink. It was about a year that, I met a guy when I was in Mexico, and I was walking down the street in a bad neighborhood, and I was the only white guy around, and I noticed this white guy was down there, and he looked out of place. It's like, what are you doing down here? I'm the only white boy around here,
Mm-hmm.
And he looked up at me with the bottle in my hand, and he's like, oh, I was like you. He's like, look what Jesus did for me. And he like pointed at his truck. He had this like nice white big truck down there, and he was building a wall for somebody. I was just like, scoff. I didn't know Jesus. I didn't have any God in my life. I was dying, alone, hated. Later that night, I just like started feeling bad and thinking about like my kids and my sister and my family. I just started feeling bad, and I hadn't really thought about any of them in a long time. I had this friend, he hit me up, and he actually like tricked me into coming back. He's like, oh, I'm gonna give you, my girl will cook for you and give you as much liquor as you want. It's all free, you're dying down here. Like, he's like, I'll even come down and pick you up. And I was like, man, after a while, finally I was like, well, if I get arrested at the border, are you gonna bail me out? He's like, oh yeah, I'll bail you out. Don't worry about it. He gets down there, and his girl won't even get out of the car. The neighborhood was that bad. And I don't know, long story short, he gets me out, and I got arrested at the border. They didn't bail me out. And so I, went through that whole process, and I ended up getting released, surprisingly, and I ditched out again, and I went to Denver, and I lived pretty much homeless there for like 6 months. My son was there. I was able to work a little and get rented a room here and there, but I mean, pretty much, hanging out at the bus stop and just drinking and seeing my son when my ex would let me, and just pathetic situation. But eventually I knew I was going to have to face it and come back here, and I expected to go to prison for a while. And so finally I left. I came back here, and I hadn't seen any of my family or anybody here in a long time. I turned myself in, and my PO locked me up. And when I was in jail, my little brother died of an overdose.
Wow.
And so that really solidified things for me, I'd say. And when I got out, I was sober, and I hadn't been sober in a long time. And I was on IPS. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's intense probation system, house arrest. And going from a reckless monster with zero time management or care for the world to IPS was extremely difficult. It was hell. It was hell on earth. I had, a super brilliant PO that was always around. I couldn't get away with nothing. She wasn't trying to get me locked up, but she wasn't about to let me get away with anything. And I think I needed that. I couldn't walk to the store for cigarettes, or I was going to prison. Any wrong move and you're going to prison.
Wow.
I hadn't seen my mom in 10 years, or I don't know how long, maybe not 10, but a long time. She let me stay on her couch. So, I had somewhere I could put on probation paperwork, and pretty much spent my time at the bus stops all around the valley, and I just went there to sleep. It was rough. I mean, she had a tiny little 1-bedroom apartment. I slept on a couch when I could sleep. She didn't really want me there. I mean, she loved me, but I had been such, bad son that, she wants money, to stay there. I've got no money. A lot of times I ended up trying to find other places to crash and just not be there. And that's one thing I feel like people don't understand, is that a lot of these people you see in the street are in that exact situation. They're homeless. They don't have a place of their own. They don't have a way to afford a place, but they've got family in town. They've just burnt all their bridges, and they may not like them. But if they got right, most people do have someone that would take them in. It's just that they've chosen the lick or the drug or whatever, which is what I did. I didn't stop drinking.
So after you got out of prison, you came out, you did your IPS or whatever, and you during the whole time you were continuing to drink, or after the IPS is over you were drinking?
I take that back. At first it wasn't IPS. It was regular probation.
Okay.
And then I didn't stop drinking.
Okay.
So, and then I violated that because I couldn't stop drinking. And then I went in again, into jail again. And then when I got out, they put me on IPS.
Okay.
So regular probation wouldn't work. I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
I wanted to. I knew I was going to go to jail. I knew I might die.
Yeah.
I mean, physically, I was really, really not doing good. So I couldn't cut at my mom's. We were fighting, it was getting really bad. So I ended up just walking down the street. And so I was, homeless. I'm not going to go back there. I can't go back there. Nothing's worth dealing with that. And, I meet a lot of people now that are in that same place. It's just their pride, like for me, I had money. I had nice things. I had a Ducati. I traveled the world. I did all these things, and so in my mind, I'm up here. I shouldn't have to be here. There's something wrong. This isn't fair. Whatever. And dealing with my mom that was angry with me and having no money was really humbling. But I couldn't take it. When I was on IPS and with all the scheduling and everything, I ended up just walking down the street. And fortunately, my sis called me at the last minute, and she was like, hey, you can sleep on my futon if you need to get away from mom for a while or whatever. And she lived in Gilbert. And so I ended up going over there. She had a small office with a futon in there, and I went over there, and I stayed there for a little while. But again, I mean, they weren't Christians. I mean, my sister is amazing, and I believe she's a believer now. But at the time, they would still drink and have, parties, and I can't be around any of that, and so it was tough. I don't know if you've ridden the buses out here, but it's enough to drive you insane. I mean, trying to make it somewhere on time in the heat and trying to look presentable, it's almost impossible.
Wow. That's not something you think about when you don't need to take the bus.
Yeah,
for sure.
I missed the bus, and I knew if I missed that bus, I wasn't going to be able to see my PO, and I was going to get violated and have to go to jail or prison. And I couldn't do it. I decided that I was going to go back to Mexico. I knew that meant leaving everyone, but I was sober for the first time. Life sucked for me. I mean, I saw no hope in me ever leveling up. I was a criminal now. Probation, there's no way I was going to make it through without violating. My family all still hated me. My kids didn't want nothing to do with me. It sucked. I had, it wasn't worth it. Right at that moment, I looked over and I saw the cross out in front of redemption. And it just hit me. Like, I remembered that guy.
This is Redemption to Church.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I remembered that guy in Mexico that told me about Jesus did this for him or whatever. And it was weird. It was just like, I just thought maybe, like, oh, maybe that's something, maybe that he could help me or whatever. And so I kept walking, and I magically, I mean, I guess it's not magic, but I made the next bus. I made it to my PO, and everything went fine. And then that night, I went on the website, and I just checked out like what they have, and I saw they had like a class that was for like new people or whatever, Launch Point. I decided to go there, and I borrowed a dress shirt. I had no clothes. I mean, I look like a total train wreck. I mean, not that I look great now, but you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have a haircut. I didn't have money for razors. My shoes were all blown out from walking. I mean, I looked like a homeless person. I walked over a mile, I guess, probably to get to Redemption, and had my shirt like off, you know, over my shoulders. It's summertime. I'm sweating. I looked horrible. And I knew they were going to kick me out. Like, as soon as they saw me, they're going to be like, you know, you need a rehab or something, not a church. You know, I just knew it. But they didn't. And I just told them, you know, that I was off, away, squandered all my money, and, you know, traded it all for liquor and prostitutes and whatever. And he said, the pastor said, oh, Jesus told your story. Go read Luke 15. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, I went home and asked my sister if she had a Bible, and she gave me this like pink Bible somebody gave her, you know, and I was like, all right, and I opened it up, and I got to Luke 15, and when he came to himself, he said, I'm going to go to my father and tell him I've sinned against him and against God, and I no longer deserve to be your son, but put me with the servants. And before he could even say that to his father, that his father saw him far off and ran to him, embraced him and hugged him, and asked him to bring the robe and put a ring on his hand. And it just hit me, you know, that I do have a father, and that he's there, and you know, I guess that was the first time I experienced, you know, the word, you know, and scripture. And so I just fell in love, you know, and I started reading, and I started going to Redemption. And they, you know, countless times I thought they would reject me, you know, every time they would ask me about who I was in my past. But they didn't. And
wow.
I don't know, it was that love that they gave me that empowered me, you know, to think about doing other things, you know, and gave me hope that there maybe was something else, you know, that I didn't know about, that I hadn't already done, that maybe I was meant to do.
It sounds like in order for you to get kind of back on your feet, you needed a whole mind shift of what you believed about the world, about yourself, in order for you to even get to the point where you're like, okay, I can make a change in my life. Because otherwise it sounded like you were totally hopeless.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I had grown up without God in my life. The world was fallen. I knew it was fallen. I normalized that. You know, I had known the depravity of man from a young age. You know, drugs and, you know, crime. I mean, I became a felon at 15. You know, I was about that. People just die there. You know, I knew all my friends are dead from high school.
Wow.
I mean, I maybe have like one left. Got used to that. I thought that was I never planned to live very long. You know, I didn't expect to live this long.
Yeah.
But yeah, without God, there was no hope.
Talk about like the process of, I mean, obviously you start going to church and things like,
Yeah.
from a mental standpoint, okay, maybe I have some hope, but how did you start the process of, okay, like to rebuild your life into, you know, the things that you have today? How did you start the process of doing that?
Yeah, well, you know, the first thing that I did was I leaned into the community. You know, like when I got saved, I I felt compelled to serve, to help others, because it was just such a mind-blowing experience, that this life really exists. I remember thinking that in the beginning, like, this is like a fantasy. I would
What about it was a fantasy?
People all loved each other. Like, I would step on campus and I would see all these people that they appeared to just love each other just because they had this person in common, this God man. Yeah, that was just incredible for me. So having that community and then feeling some worth, and even just a simple serving role really gave me purpose, I guess, some encouragement. Like, it gave me a proof that there was some change happening, and that led me to want more change, and so I started thinking about ways I could get through what I was suffering from and really adjust, because I had gotten so used to a different kind of life. So I started taking counseling. I looked into where I could go and talk to people about how I was feeling, because right away, life was still really hard. For a long time, it's still hard, but it just took a different meaning, it's worth it, the suffering. But yeah, I went to some groups and just to talk about like recovery, like how sometimes it really sucks to be sober, when in the past you could just have a few cocktails or whatever when you were feeling upset. It took a while for me to learn how to go to the scripture, right away. It wasn't first nature. But then I ended up getting an individual counselor, and I started getting that regularly. And that really gave me the space to talk about what I was experiencing in my salvation and my recovery and just adjusting to this life. And that was amazing. I also got some biblical counseling, which is even better, than regular counseling.
Yeah. So it all started from a guy just mentioning Jesus.
That was it.
And then you decided to walk to a church where you thought you would be rejected. And the powerful thing there was that you weren't.
Yeah.
They were like, come in. And then you saw the community and love, and you saw these connections of how Jesus was kind of the center of this acceptance that you'd never seen before. Mm-hmm. And that led you to then seek avenues to find places to share what you're going through, maybe in ways you've never done before, and to process that. And that sounds like that's a crazy journey from just some guy saying, Jesus changed my life, and then you didn't say, I don't know, you just left.
That was it. Yeah, I scoffed.
Yeah.
Well, how did all that lead? And I heard it a second ago. I heard the passion in your voice when you were talking about other people who were in the same situation that you were in. How did that lead to you starting your nonprofit organization for people who are dealing with that?
It's because it was a seed. It was just a seed that guy planted in me. Just saying the name. When I remembered that and I felt compelled to do the same thing. So I started doing that. And I was amazed at how God was using me to just be at the right place at the right time. When I would walk up and people would be like, they would say things like, praise Jesus, I would meet like people from other countries that don't speak English, and I would show up with like a bag, or something, and they would say, I would say praise Jesus, and they would say amen, like I can't even speak English, or I would just be driving and he was just using me, and when I first started realizing that he was using me, it changed my whole life. It went from me thinking that I was planning and that I was doing, what, like I was in control, to feeling like, and knowing that it's actually his plan, and it's just my, childlike perception that I'm in control, And then I started having people ask me for things, can you buy me something to eat? Can you get me a bus pass? Can you get me out of here? Or help me with this or that. And so I started just using, what little money I had, and that was tough. But then I started eventually asking my other Christian friends if they would help me help people. an older gentleman who was just recently became homeless, but he had a check coming in. He could afford rent, but basically his apartment just didn't renew his lease. I don't know. I just thought, well, maybe I could ask for some of my friends. You know, they have more money than me. And I called my friend, and he's like, oh yeah. He's like, absolutely. You can't outgive God, you know? And I was like, what? Okay. You know? And so I told the gentleman I'd meet him at my church to give him the money order written out to the apartment to do a deposit so he could get into a new place. And, I was just hoping nobody saw, because I didn't tell anybody else from the church really what I was doing. And this was like the first time I had done something like this. And I didn't know if the church would be okay with me doing this kind of stuff and meeting them there. And, of course, because I was scared, the main guy from the church was there and met the client there before I even got there. And he was crying, and it's like this big, huge thing. But that's when I realized that my church was supportive of what I was doing, and they were happy about it. And so that's how it all started. And then I partnered with some food banks and other churches and other people, and so I just have been doing that ever since. I mean, especially during the lockdowns, we go around all over to all the major parks, bus stops, you know, street corners, wherever we see people. And we gave out over 3,000 meals last year.
Wow.
And helped a bunch of people get off the street. I don't know how many of them got saved, but I witnessed to a lot of them.
Yeah.
All
That's
of
awesome.
them. So,
What is your organization called?
Luke 15.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is so amazing to hear, how you're making a difference in people's lives after that's where you've come from as well. And it seems like to me, when you've gone through something, it's so much easier to have sympathy or be there for people who are going through the same thing. And I think there's so many people who know nothing about homelessness. They've never experienced it. They've never been on the street.
Right.
Maybe they didn't even have the family background that would have led them there in the first place. And you say you grew up in where being a felon was just normal. Like that's just what you'd expect. Almost. And growing up in that type of situation, obviously it's possible to get out of there, but it's hard. And a lot of people don't understand that. What are some untrue stigmas of those who don't have homes that you just wish would go away from that are like kind of cast on them from people who have no idea, who've never been there? What are some stigmas that you just like, that's just not true?
Well, I hear a leopard can't change his spots thing a lot. A lot of times people, they just assume that this person will always be a drug addict that can never amount to anything. And that's just not true. I mean, I was that guy.
Yeah.
And, I'm just getting started on what God, I'm going to do for God.
Love that.
But I help a lot of people, and I believe that God's using me to help our community. And that could be true of any one of these people on the street. And I hope people will realize that. I wish that they would. The other thing is that I feel like a lot of times people think that these people they see out on the corners or at the bus stops are from out of town. They're like aliens, right? They just showed up unwanted and we just want them to go away. But these are our brothers, our children, our dads and moms and uncles that just fell off.
Mm-hmm.
Often they just walk. They just walk from wherever they were at. They walk from their family down the road to the liquor store, to the dope house, whatever. And then they just stay there. They stay with new people, and that's how they become homeless. It's not they're from a poor family or, they've been that way for a long time. I mean, I meet people all the time that are just newly homeless. And, it gets harder as you get more used to it, the longer you're on the street. But, I mean, the thing that most people on the street are in need of is what I was given, which is love.
Wow.
And, acceptance, because it's the shame of failing that it makes you angry. It makes you do, foolish things, and a lot of times they don't make it.
Man, that's just so much that I think that we can learn as a church in your story. I mean, I think about when you talk about this being a fantasy and like those people loving on each other. I mean, it's what Jesus called us to do. Like, as we love on one another, people are going to see who Jesus is. Man, that's right in your story. You talk about the prodigal son in Luke 15. Like, man, Jesus talking about that. That's in your story. And then even you taking your calling to a next step, where I feel like a lot of us in the church can just look at the church. Oh, the church is supposed to go fix that. And you said, no, God is calling me to do that, and I'm gonna go do something about it. And man, I think it's just incredible lessons that we all can take from. It's like, hey, no, if God is calling us to do something, yeah, like you were able to use the church now, maybe as a platform, and those in the church who have helped you with your nonprofit organization. But it took something inside of the individual, you, to go therefore and start it, and allow the church to be a platform for you to go do the ministry that you're doing. I think that's something that we all can learn as people who are engaging in this community together. That as we're seeing these community, we don't have to wait on a preacher or a pastor to tell you to go do it. I mean, we can just go do it in our own life.
Amen.
Can you share a little bit more about Luke 15? What is like the mission, the purpose? Like, what is it that you guys are trying to accomplish in the Phoenix area?
The primary goal is to share the gospel, witness for Jesus. The way we gain access to these individuals is often through feeding them. We're equipped with bags. We make up these bags, and the bags have like ready to eat meal. They have all the resources for the detox, for the shelters, for the food banks in the area. A number to call to connect with the church and encourages them. The primary thing I do with people, I go to church with people all the time. I find out where they're hanging out. I find a church by them, or based on what their, professed need is. I'll try to connect them with the church. But that's what we're doing. We're out witnessing for Jesus in all the dark places. We're feeding them. We're showing them that God is real, and that not everyone is fallen. I mean, not everyone is evil. Often I find people out on the street and they are just so down that they don't believe God is real. But when I show up, it gives them, proof. And if God is real, then there's hope. But when you've been in the dark for so long,
you kind of get used to the dark.
Yeah.
And in some cases, the darkness is even more comforting. Because I think you even said it, when you talked about, man, sometimes being sober sucks.
Oh, yeah.
And then now that you're in light, sometimes the darkness feels more comfortable when you've gotten used to it. And so how did you continue just to get unused to the dark and kind of used to the other side?
God did it. He gave me joy.
Wow.
And I had never really experienced joy before. I mean, when my first daughter was born, I remember seeing those just big blue eyes when she first came out, and I was full of joy. Soon followed by the worldly stresses, very quickly the joy faded. But when I first read Luke 15, he filled my heart with joy. And every time I show up and someone credits it to God, or I see someone praise Jesus, he gives me joy. When I'm there for someone that doesn't have anyone, it gives me joy. So he just feeds me joy, and that's what made the difference. Because the joy is what takes the place of all the other things that you use to bring comfort. It's immeasurably better, than any substance. Just knowing that you're in the presence of God and you can sense him, feel him, and the joy he brings in any circumstance. I mean, to be flat broke, poor, not knowing how you're going to do anything, people hating you, but still have joy is something that's unbelievable.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your story. I have one more question. But first, do you have a website for your organization?
Yeah, it's luke1517.com.
Sweet. I'll include that in the show notes to make sure people have that. They could check you out and just read more about your organization as well. Yeah. I do have one more question, then we'll wrap this up. Thank you for all you've shared today. Something I've noticed when it comes to helping those without homes is there's a lot of conflicting messages on how to do it, right? Some people say, don't feed them. That's enabling them. And others people are like you are walking up to them, hey, here's a meal. and what would you, and sometimes the conflicting messages hit us and we're like, we become paralyzed. Like, I don't know what the right thing to do is. Like, how do I actually help? Like homelessness is becoming a bigger and bigger problem all over our country. But a lot of people are paralyzed. They're like, I don't know how to help. I don't know what to do for them. I don't have I can't afford to pay for rent for anybody, so what's your advice for people who are kind of in that place where they're like, I'm hearing all these messages of like, no, feed them. No, don't feed them. Like, don't give money to panhandlers because some of them aren't homeless, but some of them are. And what do we do in those situations from your perspective?
Yeah, I definitely don't support tough love. When it comes to that sort of thing, these people are at their lowest point, and one wrong look could cause them to jump off a bridge.
Yeah.
We don't want to be that, especially as believers. We don't want to be that. We don't want to be condemning people at that point. We don't want to be judging them. But, you definitely don't want to give money to panhandlers. If you feel compelled to, a small amount of money is not a big deal. But that's definitely enabling them. And their addictions are so strong, they will for sure use it for whatever. But feeding them is what we're called to do, as it's written. We're called to feed them. Now, I would say that just your presence and a meal is proof God exists, but I would always go further and provide some direction pointing them towards the cross. I don't give food to people without telling them to praise Jesus. I don't let them thank me. I direct that to where it's supposed to go. And I go further. I give them little crosses. I do everything I can to plant that seed. If I had my way, I would have every person with a heart for Jesus to have some kind of ministry. It doesn't matter what it is. Something that they're doing as an individual with their family.
Wow, yeah.
Whether it's making sandwiches or writing prayers, on notes, whatever it is, something that you and your children and your family can experience working for the man, the real man, out there in the street, doing what he's called you to do there's nothing better than that, and a lot of times I think people are afraid. They're afraid that, they might get hurt or, they'll take on too much. And it's good to be conscious of that. You don't want to ever bring somebody who's maybe addicted into your home. You never want to do that. You don't want to, even really give them your personal phone number if you can avoid it. You want to keep a boundary. But, your objective should be to prove that God is real to people in their darkest moment.
Yeah, and to love them without what you said, the judgment and the condemnation.
Yeah.
Because you said that like you said, I love that. These people are in their lowest point, and it is convicting to me to be like, one wrong look might send them off. They've already think everybody hates them. Yeah. They're in that place, and they have no reason. They have no hope. And so what you're doing is you're giving them food. You're giving them hope and saying, it's not me that's doing this for you. I want you to know it's Jesus because he loves you. And I think that is so cool. And I love what you said about every family, every person, individual should have like a ministry, even if it's not like a full-on organization, but something that you do because you love Jesus and because of what he's done for you.
It's really good.
Yeah.
It's so good. So good. Yeah.
Cool. Wow. Thank you so much, Justin, for being here, for being who you are. Praise Jesus that you're here with us today.
Yeah, it wasn't me.
Yeah. That's so incredible. That is it for us today on the podcast. Before you go, please give us a like or a comment or a review wherever you are. You know, you can figure it out. You're smart people out there. And that's because we want people to hear the stories like Justin's.
Right.
This isn't about me. This isn't about, you know, Central where we're recording this podcast. This is about these stories that often don't get heard being heard.
Yeah.
It's so important to hear what God is doing, to hear the stories of people's lives so that we have a better perspective, because none of us have the perspective that another human being has. And so hearing your story, Justin, helps us all grow, helps us all become better. And so that's why we want you to like and share, because we want people to hear this and be changed and grow. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a part of this. We record here at Central Christian Church in Arizona. Our community here is pursuing the mantra of love beyond, which calls us to empathize with people who are different and build bridges of peace. If you're interested at all learning more about our church, check us out at centralaz.com. We have online service as well as a bunch of really cool campuses in the Valley of Phoenix. And we'll see you at next episode of Beyond the Lines. Until then, start loving beyond your lines. Thank you, everybody.